First things first, shout out to a new sponsor of the stream, Woo Exchange. This is actually an exchange that I don't have a problem shilling, because if you look at it, this is something that I've talked about for a really long time, having DOMs. This is the actual exchange interface. It's completely customizable. I can augment and edit anything and everything that you're looking at, set up my templates how I want them. I don't even have to have a chart. I could have 4 DOMs across the screen. In terms of if you're a lower time frame trader, if you're an intraday trader, scalper, whatnot, it's always been my opinion that you just want to execute on a DOM. Obviously, tomorrow we have the FOMC, so federal funds rate. There is a lot of belief that the Fed is done hiking. It's the end of the hike cycle. Historically, the ending of hike cycles has not been sort of a springboard for markets moving up. If anything, at the end of hike cycles, if I recall correctly, this has been something that has preceded markets continuing to draw down, specifically talking about legacy markets. Obviously, crypto and legacy right now not correlated at all, and if anything, inversely correlated. But this is always something worth keeping an eye on, and since I trade index futures and legacy markets as well, I need to know exactly what moves my markets and not miss a beat there, because there was a time 2 weeks ago I talked about this on a stream. I'm trading and I'm having a great morning, and I neglected to pay attention to the calendar, and there was an event, I think it was PMI, and the market ripped against me. So this is something worth keeping an eye on. Are we at the end of the hiking cycle? Obviously, what is this market really keen on? Any kind of negligence in terms of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and central banks and the Fed specifically. So crypto is more focused on like, hey, when is the Fed going to cut rates, yada, yada, yada. You know, we've seen sort of this hidden QE, and there's been a lot of things that would make you say, okay, the dollar is being devalued, stronger case for Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. And Bitcoin has obviously performed exceptionally this year. It is the best performing asset, if I recall correctly, maybe under like, you know, Netflix, but it's our asset, right? And it's a liquid asset and sort of the representative, the ambassador of the crypto market. So one thing that's worth keeping in mind, things like this. So CEO Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, is going to be selling his shares for the first time. I believe he's selling 1 million shares. 1 million of his 8.6 million. That's a lot of money. It's that trading at 150, maybe, so he gets like 140, 150 million dollars. This is interesting, right? This is the head of a major bank selling. He's never sold. You know, there's a lot of talk about a recession in 2024, things sort of operating on a lag and that not having caught up to us yet. So this is something that's worth keeping in mind. You know, there's a lot of people that are going to talk about the last time that a major person sold shares. We're talking about, like, for example, Jeff Bezos in November 2021. Bezos basically sold the top, right? The thing is, Jamie Dimon, this is going to be his first time selling shares. Bezos, he sold in November 2021, and he sold $8.8 billion worth of stock. I believe he sold that for charity or something like that. And it wasn't the case that that was like the first time he sold. He sold it under the guise of selling for charity, but he was selling the top of the market. Bezos sold stock like many times leading up to that. But the Jamie Dimon thing seems kind of ominous. But then we have conflicting positive news from Druck, who says Bitcoin is a brand he should probably own. This is on the block. So former hedge fund manager and billionaire Stan Druckenmiller said he owns gold but not Bitcoin. Maybe that's a mistake. You know my opinion on this. Long-term believer in BTC over the higher time frames. Probably in 10 years going to kick myself when I look back at all the times I traded it. Have I traded it effectively? Obviously yes, otherwise I wouldn't. But do I have a significant spot portfolio because I believe in this long term? Absolutely. And I think it's just a matter of what are millennials, what are the younger Zoomers choosing? And it's crypto, right? So I think that this is going to propel the crypto market over the next decade. And I think that BTC is obviously going to be a major beneficiary of that. It's not going to give you multiples, right? Maybe it will. Who knows what could send us to ridiculous multiples? It probably wouldn't be a good world, but in terms of adding to your portfolio, like, it's a no-brainer for me. So I think a lot of TradFi guys are going to be coming around to this, especially with the ETF, right? They're going to be introducing this to people that didn't care and wouldn't care until people like this said something and until people like this owned some of it. As far as the ETF goes, I think the ETF tops the market for a bit. It's a question of how much the market will move up when the ETF lists. That period between the ETF getting approved and listing, I think that, yeah, you could see anywhere between a $1,000, $5,000 move. Who knows? Maybe it's more, right? This market rips. You heard it here. I think that after the ETF, we're probably topped for a few months at least. And then one last thing I want to get out of the way before we look at the charts. There was actually something in the SBF testimony, if you guys have been paying attention to that. He actually told the truth, which is interesting because not something he really does often. So He said, you called people in crypto Twitter dumb motherfuckers, and SBF said a subset of them, yes. So I thought that was interesting because he does lie a lot, and that was one case of him actually telling the truth, which was really nice to see. So BTC, high time frame BTC, it doesn't really get much greener than this. Talked about this 31K level for who knows how long. Through this level, it doesn't really make sense to overthink it. Can it be a signal that fails? Absolutely. But amongst all the signals you're going to act on, is this one that you probably should? Myself personally, yes. So I add on something like this. I don't anticipate that it's going to be a swing failure through this level. I don't anticipate it's going to be a breakdown, or I'm not going to try to predict the future there. I'm just going to add based on this because it's a major change in market structure, and the market has been focusing on these levels for so long that now you have everyone focusing on the change. So there's two big ways that it's actually changed, because we broke through a prior macro range low. So we have this low going back to summer 2021, and we also broke out of this multi-month range. So this is significant on many fronts, and I don't want to overthink it. So I think that a lot of alts are doing this as well. So high time frame wise, yeah, we're looking at maybe a monthly close below that level. I don't think that it's going to be that. But for all intents and purposes, BTC high time frame, it doesn't really get much better than that. The kind of breakout you would want to see, high volume, very expansive candle, multi-standard deviation move. Again, I think that this is leading up to something that's going to be a longer term sell-off. But for this signal right now, it's hard to be bearish on BTC unless it's back below 30K. So where does that leave you in terms of optimal entries? Well, after the market moved up, you're more than likely going to fall into some kind of balance. The best opportunity is honestly after the first balance day off a trending move. If we look at the big day on the 23rd, we had a balance day after, and you're looking to play range extremes at that point. You're kind of anticipating that if you had a really strong trend day and you're beginning to fall into balance, once you put in a high low, you're probably going to be trading within that for some time. So you'll see on Coinalyze right now, I talk about in bull markets, it's important to pay attention to coin margin contracts because a lot of people are going to be denominating in BTC. It's a way to get some kind of convexity if you're trading futures. And also people are going to be hedging into this as well. So the lows of the 27th, 28th, you start to see more aggressive selling in the coin margin. That's the first real attempt to the downside after being within sort of a 3-day area of balance. This is a really clean structure right now, to be fair. You have value overlap for the last 3. You had 2 periods of non-value overlap before that. So if we just create what is basically a volume profile or composite for this entire structure, you can see we're more or less just left with this. This is our composite for the last week plus. You could set triggers on the exterior of this now. So through 35 through, let's say, 33.50. To be fair, I think that if you get a breakout through 35, if we see the market is above there, we're starting to show signs of not overheating, but the derivatives are starting to not overextended. The one thing that's important to understand in a bull market is they're always going to be overextended, right? Because everyone wants access to that leverage, so they're going to be paying the cost of that. When something is in demand, it's going to cost more money. So the same thing applies to leverage. And one thing to understand is I talked about the quarterly futures contracts. So if we just go to futures, I talked about quarterlies. I talked about this heating up when price is moving sideways. So you have people betting long term. They're betting on something that trades at a premium, that has to roll up the futures curve, but doesn't have that interest rate component, so it might not get as hot as perps potentially. But the fact that this is elevated again, this does actually invite sellers into the market. So the fact that quarterlies are, they're double digits at this point. So selling the quarterlies, buying spot, and expecting that to converge, annualize, that's just under 10%. So it's not egregious yet, but it's just starting to pick up. You just want to see that we're not getting to a point where the spot market is just being absolutely left behind. You want to see that at the bottom that people are interested in buying spot BTC. But if we break through 35, you have a really clean break from balance. I think the first logical target is 36, to be fair. So my reasoning is strong impulsive move. If it's the beginning of a bull market, it's one thing. I don't think it's the beginning of a bull market in the rip roaring sense. I think we're at the beginning of the bull market in a local sense that we're closer to the bottom, obviously, than anything else still. So the longer that we consolidate, the more of a sign that, okay, clearly, listen, there's not a lot of new money coming into the system. We're not there yet. So I kind of anticipate, honestly, 36K getting tapped, and we could just move sideways even more and have something like these consolidations where they just were messy for a long time. The market doesn't trend a majority of the time. It trends a minority of the time. So you have more ranging than anything else. If I was tasked with trying to predict the future, I'd anticipate that we're not just going to rip all the way up through 40K yet in the near future. So 36K would be my first target in that break from balance. From there, I would play the round numbers. I'd play 36, 37. From a high time frame standpoint, midpoint of this prior range, So upwards of 40K would reasonably over a longer time frame be your target. But in terms of just trading, I think just near future, we have a little bit more to deal with. Holding 32, right? Holding the underside of this structure, continuing to trade within there and not losing that level. Yeah, your next targets are reasonably going to be between, I'd say, 40 and 42. But in terms of being nimble, I don't think we're looking at that in the near future. Downside levels to focus on, and again, things you don't want to see get returned to very quickly, are your gaps. We do have an area of single prints. So through the gap, down around 32.5. That's our next area of singles. So if you looked at your profile, this is an area where there's really no two-way trade. Value had not developed. And this is an area where we're pretty untested in terms of longs just getting away with buying a breakout. So if you come back to this level, you know, shorts getting blown through as well. If you come back to this level, this would be an area where I would anticipate the market to possibly find its first quick response. So around 32.5, if we get back down there, I think the risk reward there is attractive. There's a lot of people that probably feel a good amount of FOMO right now because, you know, we put in a very significant move. Alts are up, BTC is up. What I'll just say, though, is that I think that buying there around 34 or 33 at the end of 2024 turns out to be a beneficial price. So if we look at BTC, it's well off the lows. It's 100% off the lows. But if from a risk reward standpoint, so from the fact that we've changed and broken through this level, we're still relatively close to that level. So I think that we're looking at 40s. And if you can get involved between here and 31K, I think you're golden still. I don't think you need to rush this. It's kind of like when we had this breakout back here. It's some kind of version of what's taking place back here. But the idea was, there's a lot of people that felt like maybe this was late, even felt like this was late. And I just think that that's clearly going to turn out to not be the case. With alts, it's even more significant though, right? You know, you have Solana that is talking about itself as being a competitor to ETH or dethroning ETH. If you look at Solana, it's what, 30 times less the market cap of ETH. So even if that gap closes a little bit, we're looking at Solana doubling from here is reasonable without any kind of major changes in the market because of this change in market structure, because again, flows are a little bit more supportive. And then just looking at some other alts, for example, like Woo, I said, I'm biased on Woo, obviously, because I'm working with Woo, but something like this, it's an exchange token and you're putting in this kind of rounded bottom, this higher low forming on the weekly, interim targets being around 30. But if we're looking into the next cycle, I think that a lot of these decisions that people are making are worried about buying Link, for example, because they're outside of this range and they feel like they missed it. I think that this between 11 and 850 is going to look like a rounding error, right? If we're talking a year, 2 years into the future, as the crypto market continues to grow. I do think you need to be more of a picker. So I don't think that you're going to get away with spraying and praying as much. That never works out in the long term because most alts end up trending to zero. But for Pepe, for example, sort of one of the darlings of that brief meme period we had. And this is new too. I talked about this maybe being similar to Doge. The best thing you do is honestly compress your log chart and take a view at the chart like this. Because I think that even when you look at the framing of a trading view chart, it gives you the impression you're well off the low, right? Because we're close to the margin at the bottom. I think you got to make sure you pick your spots. I think a lot of alts are putting in rounded bottoms. Structural retests are nice, but this is the time when I'm taking a little bit more risks and buying a little bit earlier than I would normally wait to buy, which would be more of a deeper pullback retest of the level. You might not get that risk reward. So just keep that in mind. And my advice to you is don't freak out. Pick your spots, have a plan. That's what you need to do. And if you're worried that you're going to miss out, just tag on some exposure. So that's that, guys. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. Be sure to like the video. Leave a comment below on what you would want me to touch on next video, and I'll make sure to touch on some of those things. Enjoy your day.